Hi there, everyone. Good afternoon, and my name is Matthew Smith. I am working with Pilot Energy on the Eureka 3D Marine Seismic Survey. Today I'm going to cover a little bit about Pilot Energy. I'm going to answer the question of what is a seismic survey, and I'll try and answer why it is that we do seismic surveys. We'll also cover a little bit of ground about the environmental impacts and risks of seismic surveys, and we'll talk about the consultation that we're undertaking in order to seek permission from the federal government to undertake these works. I'll also talk a little bit about the mitigations, about so how we protect the marine environment, and I'll try and make that as specific as I can to traditional owners in this region. But first, a little bit about Pilot Energy. So we're an oil and gas exploration and production company. We're classed as a junior. We're a smaller company, and we are looking for oil and gas in this region to supply the domestic market. There's been a number of gas finds onshore in WA in this Midwest region recently, and we believe that there's prospectivity in the offshore region. And when we talk about the Eureka Marine Seismic Survey, we are exclusively talking about Commonwealth waters, so about 5.5 kilometres offshore from the coast of WA. So the asset that Pilot Energy has is a title, which is outlined in yellow on the map that you can see, and that is called WA481P. And that Pilot Energy has 100% interest in that, which is the largest offshore exploration permit in Australia. Pilot Energy is also a 21.25% interest joint venture partner in the Cliffhead oil field, which is located just off Cliffhead, just south of Dongra. So you're probably asking, what is a seismic survey? So a seismic survey is where we put sound waves through compressed air through the marine environment and deep into the source rock. About 3 kilometers deep is where we're looking, and we need this sound to be reflected back to some receivers called hydrophones off that source rock. So we emit the sound as is shown in the diagram. That sound then reflects back off the different types of rock, and we measure the sound levels that we receive in return from those reflections. And so what you can see here is it's a boat out on the water, and that boat is towing a sound source, so an acoustic source, and it's also towing all of the hydrophones that are listening and then receiving that sound. Here's some diagrams of the seismic equipment. It's quite large equipment. The boats are quite large. The 3D component of the survey comes from the number of streamers that are towed behind the vessel. So you can see the streamers towed behind the vessel there in the pictures. And the more streamers we have, the more hydrophones we can have. So the more listening devices we have to receive that signal back from the source rock. Those streamers are towed behind the boat, but when they're not towed behind the boat, they're up on reels. And so the big reels that you can see there on the back of the vessel, and that's how they're stowed when we're transiting in between different surveys. And on the right of the screen there, you'll be able to see some sound sources. So typically there's multiple that make up what's called an array. And those sound sources create, there's a certain amount of air buildup and pressure buildup, and then that pressure is released to create that sound pressure wave. So you might also be asking, why is it we do 3D seismic surveys? So we are looking to gather images of rock layers in the earth to basically find petroleum deposits. And what you can see is an image on the slide whereby you can see the sort of cross section line and slowly that slide is kind of building up the different rock layers, and as those colors change, those are indicating high spots or low spots based on different source rock layers. Also on the slide, you can see a boat with a number of streamers being towed behind it, and that's typically what 3D acquisition looks like. There's a couple of other vessels that will be out there as spotter vessels to look for marine mammals and make sure the environment is protected, but also to work with other marine users as well. And that picture is from a very calm day at sea. Of course, it's not always like that out on the Midwest. So whereabouts is the Eureka 3D seismic going to be or proposed to be undertaken? So on the slide here, you can kind of see a Google Earth image looking into the West Australian Midwest coast. That's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the yellow outline of the title. And then you can see a number of different polygons, those shapes there. So you've got 3 shapes there that are green. So they are areas where there has already been seismic surveys undertaken, and we typically don't go back to the same area twice. It does happen occasionally, but that's not the case for Eureka. But with Eureka, you can see the large yellow, or probably it's not as large as some of those polygons, but the yellow polygon there is the proposed Eureka 3D seismic survey. So the very northern end of it sort of is just south of Dongra, all the way down to pretty much to Beagle Island. That's this overall spatial extent of this survey. In terms of our zooming in, then, if we look at that area, we've got some detailed bathymetry that you can see in the area there. So we know that we've got some areas that are inshore, or rather, I should say, inside of Leander Reef, meaning they're quite shallow, about 10 to 12 meters water depth. And we've got a particular survey design to be able to acquire those shallower areas. And then you can see as the blue kind of comes through in that image, we get into much deeper water. So up to about 50 meters is the deepest that we'll be operating. And the proposed survey is due to last about 30 days is the maximum amount of acquisition, and about 40 days in total of the boat being on the water. Now, if we have perfect weather conditions and we have no maintenance hiccups, and everything goes our way in terms of interaction with others on the water, potentially we only need to be out there for 20 to 25 days in total. But of course, sometimes things don't quite go as you planned, and so we have allowances for a little bit of extra time in that 40-day period. So we're required to undertake consultation with people who may be affected by our activities. And so it's important we outline what our activities are and what the types of effects are that people may be concerned about. And so we've outlined in the previous slides the where and how long. It's worth identifying, obviously, at this point that there are a couple of survey windows in terms of timing of the year. So we're currently looking at a February-March acquisition timing. It's when the weather is best, and we have been able to find a small window from an environmental perspective whereby we believe we're having the least amount of impact if we acquire in that window. And the types of impacts that we often talk about, some of them are very routine, very similar to many vessels that pass up and down that coast, much smaller vessels than come in and out of Geraldton. But just as an example of those kind of environmental impacts, we can have some atmospheric emissions, obviously, from the vessel being out there. At night time, of course, we'll have elevated levels of light. We are obviously a boat out on the water towing these streamers behind us, and so there's a physical interaction with other users. For the shallower areas, we do have a very small amount of seabed disturbance, where we take ocean bottom nodes, they're called, and they're about the size probably of let's call it a big filing cabinet, and they get lowered down onto the seabed, and that they're all recovered afterwards. So a little bit of seabed disturbance there. And then routine discharges from the vessel, so effluent discharges, macerated waste type discharges, again the same as any vessel out there on the water. And of course, the major impact is sound, and there are two components to sound that we're concerned about. One is the continuous sound of the vessel, the engines being out there, but obviously the sound that's impulsive, whereby these pressure waves that anywhere between 10 or 20 seconds we discharge this pressure wave into the water. And that impulsive sound, rather than the continuous sound, is of slightly more concern. And the impulsive sound is at slightly higher levels. So that's something we need to manage. I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a moment. But of course, there are also risks when you work in the marine environment, and these are risks that are generally well controlled for these types of activities. And there have been hundreds of these activities around the Australian coast over the last 60 or 70 years. But the risks do remain, and they are listed on the slide. So things like hydrocarbon spills or deck spills, we could potentially lose waste overboard, particularly if in windy environments such as the Midwest. We have the potential for interactions with marine fauna, and it's possible that some of our equipment might get lost. If we come into port, then we also have to be concerned about invasive marine species. And as we get into shallower waters even, we need to put controls in place for preventing invasive marine species settling around the reef structures. So that's a little bit about the things you might be concerned about. And the purpose of the presentation is to share those things so that you can raise them with us. If you're more concerned about something over any other thing there, then we can talk about that in more detail. You're almost certainly concerned about the noise, and that's generally what we've heard from people that we've engaged with along the coast, and that's for good reason, because if things are not properly controlled, we can have unacceptable effects on marine life. But we as Pilot Energy, we believe that we can manage these effects, provided that we've put the mitigations and the measures in place that make sure that we're protecting wildlife and we're protecting the environment. But just to outline the effects of seismic surveys, if things are left unmanaged, we can have effects like what's called a temporary threshold shift, which is where animals may experience essentially a dulling of their senses as it relates to sound for a short period of time before recovering. And then if those animals get really, really close to the sound source, and I'm talking in the orders of tens of meters, there is a thing called a permanent threshold shift, or PTS, and that is something that's obviously unacceptable, and we actively try and manage that, particularly for marine mammals such as whales and sea lions and things. What's more likely is that most animals in the marine environment, most fish species, most marine mammals, will show some kind of behavioural change. And those are acceptable impacts according to the Department of Environment. So those are impacts we are allowed to have because they're only behavioural. And it means there might be some avoidance of the noise, which is very likely in almost all cases, particularly where those species are mobile. But behavioural is something that, whilst that may be acceptable according to the legislation in Australia, we still need to monitor for that and be cautious. There are some other effects as well that are called masking, which is actually interfering with vocal communication or echolocation, if that's how that species is affected by sound. And it may sort of mess with the signals and sounds produced by predators and prey, so it can have some other destabilizing effects. All of the behavioral and those masking effects are temporary in that when we're no longer surveying. So after that sort of 20 to 25 day, or maximum of 30-day period, I should say, then those effects are gone after that time. So what are the things we're concerned about? So we've done a lot of study at the moment, and you can see some air guns there in the image that are the seismic source that is discharging the sound. And the things we're really concerned about are listed on the screen. So fish eggs and larvae, the benthic invertebrates. There's a large lobster population in particular in this area. Also fishing for fishes. So sharks, rays, billfish, jewfish, and many other fish species as well. We're particularly concerned about marine mammals because they have elevated levels of protection under the legislation. And so we have to put specific measures in place to shut down if we see whales or sea lions within certain distances. Dolphins are a little bit different. They don't hear the sounds that we produce in the same way that humans don't hear a dog whistle. Dolphins aren't going to hear the sounds that the seismic surveys produce, and we often find dolphins will play with the vessels and in and out of the streamers. Of course, in this area, we've got a huge recreational and probably even bigger commercial fishery interests. So those are people that we have to talk to and have to protect their interests. And we've got tourism and recreational diving. Now, all of these receptors have a cultural component to them as well. So it's not just the physical things that we're concerned about, but it's also the cultural, meaning the spiritual connection that people may have to these receptors or the area in general. And so we've heard from Tristan and the Witandi Littlewell Aboriginal Corporation about the totemic value of some species, and then the song lines associated with those species as well. So there's no specific mention of traditional owner values there, but obviously all of those things have some kind of sea country value. Just before I go on to that, just a little bit about our management actions. So there's lots of things that we do to protect the marine environment. The image you can see on the screen is actually fitted to the end of the streamers. That's called a turtle guard. And it means that things like turtles, who often are very inquisitive and may well come and have a play, they don't get stuck in those turtle guards, which are guarding the propellers. There's little impellers, or propellers rather, that are fitted on the end of the streamers, and these devices protect turtles, just as an example. But we also have to put limits on our activity. So one of the things we've done is put a 300-meter buffer around the 12-meter contour of Leander Reef. So wherever the reef is shallower than 12 meters, we won't be surveying over that area. And we've put a 300-meter buffer around that area, and that's protective of those reef structures and the juvenile species that would reside there, and obviously the protection for rock lobsters in those areas as well. For marine mammals, we have fauna observers. So we're checking and looking for marine mammals all the time, and if we see any, we have particular protocols in place to have to shut down at certain times. We have exclusion zones, so we're very conscious of the sea lion population at Beagle Island, and so we have implemented a 10-kilometer, it's actually 9.3-kilometer buffer around Beagle Island. I think that's the right number anyway. But Beagle Island, obviously being a big population of sea lions, is something that we can protect by making sure that the vessel and the streamers don't come within 10 kilometers of that area. So obviously it's in our interest to reduce the amount of time that we're out there, not only for financial reasons, but environmental reasons. So we try and keep the survey to as short a time as we possibly can. And we make sure that we're only discharging the sound source only when we need to. And we will obviously communicate with people on the water, and we will also be putting in place a compensation regime for commercial fishers with evidence that they have fished in those areas. We'll be putting some compensation in place. So finally, for the audience today is traditional owners in the Midwest region, and so really what Pilot Energy wants to communicate to you is that we have an obligation to protect sea country, and we want to do that by consulting with local traditional owners, all the way through from individuals through to Aboriginal corporations, through to the directors and the elders. And really what we want to consult about is understanding sea country values and sensitivities. We want help and sort of input into our assessments and management of totemic species in the region in particular. We want to learn more about the spiritual and cultural connections to sea country, and finding out ways that we can protect sea country, and preserve country and culture. And obviously, at the end of the day, for us, we want to find respectful ways of carrying out the Eureka 3D marine seismic survey. So we're going to be working with traditional owners in the region. We would really like to be able to get in contact with any of you, or if you want to reach out and talk to us directly, that we can make that work as well. We have a specific website that you can go and gather more information on. It's www.eureka3dmss.com.au, and I hope to be able to talk to many of you in the future. Thanks for your time.